My name is Victor Henley. I'm 63 years old, born in a small industrial town in Ohio where my father worked the steel mills until his lungs gave out. I've lived what most would call an unremarkable life. Quiet, measured, devoted to family above all else. For 35 years, I worked as a financial consultant, helping small businesses navigate the treacherous waters of corporate finance. I never sought the spotlight, never craved recognition. I simply did my work, raised my children, and believed that love and sacrifice would be enough. I was wrong. The moment that shattered my world came on a Thursday evening in November, during what was supposed to be my birthday celebration. My son Marcus had insisted on hosting the party at his trendy downtown loft, all exposed brick and floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased the city lights like a crown jewel. The guest list was a careful curation of his social media followers, business contacts, and what he called influential friends. I should have known then that I was merely a prop in his performance. The evening began pleasantly enough. Marcus played the dutiful son, arm around my shoulders as cameras flashed and phones recorded. His girlfriend Sarah smiled her practiced smile, the one I'd seen her rehearse in bathroom mirrors. The apartment buzzed with conversations about crypto investments, influencer marketing, and startup valuations. I stood in the corner, nursing a glass of wine, watching my son work the room like the consummate performer he'd become. The turning point came during the toasts. Marcus tapped his champagne glass with a silver knife, commanding attention as he always did. The room fell silent, faces turning towards us like sunflowers following the sun. I expected the usual platitudes, gratitude, love, perhaps an embarrassing childhood story that would make everyone chuckle. Instead, I got something else entirely. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus began, his voice carrying that particular timbre he used for his podcast. "Tonight, we celebrate my father, Victor Henley, a man who has taught me one of life's most valuable lessons." He paused for dramatic effect, and I felt a flutter of warmth. Perhaps I had misjudged the evening. "He's taught me exactly what I never want to become." The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt my chest tighten, my face flush hot with confusion and dawning horror. Marcus continued, emboldened by the nervous laughter rippling through the crowd. "Here's a man who spent his entire life playing it safe, working a boring job, never taking risks, never building anything meaningful. Dad, you've shown me that a life without ambition, without vision, without the courage to dream big is essentially worthless." The word worthless hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. "So thank you, Dad, for being the perfect example of mediocrity. Your life serves as my daily motivation to be everything you never were." The room erupted in uncomfortable applause. I saw faces, some mortified, others amused, a few openly delighted by the cruelty of it all. Sarah was filming everything on her phone, no doubt already planning which clips would perform best on their social channels. I stood frozen, my wine glass trembling in my hand. 63 years of life, of sacrifice, of quiet dignity, reduced to a punchline for his entertainment. The weight of every mortgage payment I had made on this very apartment, every school loan I had co-signed, every crisis I had quietly resolved to protect his reputation, all of it crashed over me in that moment. Marcus raised his glass higher. "To Victor Henley, proof that not all heroes wear capes, some just wear disappointment." The laughter was louder this time, more genuine. These people, his people, were enjoying my humiliation. I was the fool in their comedy, the cautionary tale in their success story. I set my wine glass down on the nearest table with a steady hand, though everything inside me was screaming. I walked to Marcus, placed my hand on his shoulder, the same shoulder I'd steadied when he was learning to ride a bicycle, when he was nervous for his first date, when he was afraid he might not graduate college. "Thank you for the lesson, son," I said quietly. I've learned something valuable tonight, too. I left without another word. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. The elevator ride down felt endless. 47 floors of descent, each one carrying me further from the life I thought I knew. In the polished steel of the elevator doors, I caught my reflection. A tired old man in an ill-fitting suit, someone who had been dismissed and discarded by his own child. But there was something else in that reflection, something I hadn't seen in years. My jaw was set, my eyes focused with a clarity that surprised me. The hurt was there, certainly, but underneath, something harder was taking shape. I drove home through empty streets, my hands steady on the wheel. The shock was wearing off, replaced with a cold, calculating calm that felt foreign, yet familiar. I had felt this way only once before, 30 years ago, when a client tried to defraud me out of a substantial commission. I had destroyed his business within 6 months, quietly and methodically, using nothing but patience and the truth. Back in my modest 2-bedroom house, I sat in my home office and stared at the documents spread across my desk. The deed to Marcus's apartment, the one I'd purchased outright and put in his name as a graduation gift. The trust fund I'd established for his future children. The investment portfolio I'd been building to secure his financial independence. All of it planned as surprises. All of it motivated by love. I picked up my phone and made the first call. "Elena, it's Victor Henley. I need to see you tomorrow morning. Cancel the trust fund. Yes, immediately." The second call was to my investment advisor. "David, it's Victor. I want to liquidate the portfolio we discussed, the one for Marcus." "No, there's been a change of plans." The third call was the most satisfying. I canceled the surprise European vacation I'd been planning to give Marcus and Sarah for their anniversary. The non-refundable deposits would remain non-refundable. As I destroyed the birthday card I'd written him, filled with memories of our fishing trips, his Little League games, the pride I'd felt watching him graduate college, I made myself a promise. Revenge would not be hasty. It would be just. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror before bed. The man staring back at me was someone new. Someone who had been sleeping for too long. Someone who understood, finally, that kindness mistaken for weakness becomes an invitation for cruelty. "Your life is worthless," I said to my reflection, repeating Marcus's words. "Let's see about that." The morning after arrived gray and bitter, matching my mood perfectly. I sat in my kitchen with coffee that had grown cold, staring out at the bare November trees in my backyard. The silence of my empty house felt different now. Not lonely, but focused, like the quiet before a storm. I allowed myself to remember, really remember. 1987. Marcus was 7, diagnosed with a severe learning disability that required specialized tutoring. Insurance wouldn't cover it. I sold my beloved 1973 Mustang, the car I'd restored with my own hands, to pay for 2 years of intensive therapy. When Marcus finally learned to read fluently, he never knew the sacrifice that made it possible. 1995. Sarah's family business collapsed, leaving their parents destitute. Marcus was desperate to help his girlfriend, but had no resources of his own. I quietly liquidated my retirement savings and created a shell company to hire Sarah's father as a consultant, paying him $50,000 for work that didn't exist. Sarah's family kept their house. She never knew where the money came from. 2001. The dot-com crash devastated my portfolio just as Marcus was applying to Ivy League schools. I took a second mortgage on my house and worked 18-hour days, taking on clients I'd previously refused because their business practices disgusted me. I aged 5 years in one, developing the stress-related heart condition that still wakes me at 3 a.m. Marcus got into Colombia. He told everyone he'd earned it through his own merit. 2008. The financial crisis hit just as Marcus was launching his first venture, a social media marketing company that existed more in ambition than reality. His investors pulled out overnight. I used my professional connections to introduce him to Elena Rodriguez, a former colleague who'd become a successful venture capitalist. I called in favors accumulated over decades, convincing her to give Marcus a chance. His company survived and eventually thrived. He credited his own networking skills. 2015. Marcus's reckless spending and gambling had created a mountain of credit card debt that threatened to destroy his credit rating and his business reputation. He came to me in tears, terrified and ashamed. I paid off $68,000 in debt and arranged for the payments to appear as if they came from a debt consolidation loan. Marcus never paid me back, eventually convincing himself he'd solved the crisis independently. Each memory cut deeper than the last, not because of the money. Money was just numbers on a screen, but because of the pattern. The complete erasure of my contributions from the story of his life, the rewriting of history to make himself the hero of every chapter. I had been a ghost in my own son's biography. But ghosts, I was beginning to remember, had certain advantages. I walked to my home office and opened the locked filing cabinet I hadn't touched in years. Inside were the remnants of my old professional life, the one Marcus had dismissed as worthless. Contact cards, client files, investment records, and something else, something I'd almost forgotten about: the offshore account. During my consulting years, I'd specialized in helping clients navigate complex international tax situations, perfectly legal, but requiring an intricate understanding of financial loopholes and regulatory blind spots. I'd maintain my own offshore account, not for tax evasion, but as a hedge against economic instability. Over the years, careful investments and compound interest had turned my modest emergency fund into something substantial. I logged into the account for the first time in 5 years. The balance made me sit back in my chair. $2.3 million. Marcus had called my life worthless. If only he knew that his worthless father had accumulated more liquid wealth than Marcus's entire business was worth. I opened my laptop and began to write. Not a plan, exactly, but a blueprint. A step-by-step guide to dismantling a life built on arrogance and deception. The phone rang. Marcus's number appeared on the screen. I let it ring. He tried 3 more times that evening, probably wanting to offer some half-hearted apology or perhaps ask for another favor. Each time, I watched the phone buzz against the wooden desk and felt nothing but cold satisfaction. Outside my window, the bare trees swayed in the wind, their branches reaching toward a sky the color of slate. Winter was coming, and I had work to do.
Elena's intelligence report arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by encrypted email as promised. 37 pages of financial forensics that painted a picture of breathtaking incompetence masked by social media smoke and mirrors. I read it twice over my morning coffee, taking notes in the margins like a general studying enemy positions. Apex Social Dynamics was hemorrhaging money. Their Vertex Corp contract, worth 60% of their annual revenue, was built on fabricated performance metrics. They'd been photoshopping engagement statistics and buying fake followers to inflate their apparent success. Worse, they'd been billing Vertex for premium influencer partnerships that consisted mostly of Marcus's girlfriend Sarah posting sponsored content to her artificially inflated Instagram following. But the most damning discovery was their debt structure. Marcus had personally guaranteed business loans using assets he didn't actually own, including the apartment I'd purchased for him. He lied on loan applications, inflated his income, and used the same collateral for multiple credit lines. It was a house of cards built on quicksand during an earthquake. I started small. The first anonymous email went to Vertex Corp's head of marketing, a woman named Jennifer Walsh, whose professional reputation was built on measurable results. I sent her a detailed analysis of Apex's actual engagement metrics versus their reported figures, complete with screenshots showing purchased bot followers and algorithmic manipulation. "Thought you might find this interesting before your contract renewal meeting," I wrote from a burner email account. A concerned industry professional. 3 days later, Elena called me. "Victor, did you hear? Vertex Corp terminated their contract with Apex Social Dynamics. Apparently they discovered some irregularities in their performance reporting." The second wave targeted their creditors. Marcus had been clever about spreading his debt across multiple institutions, keeping individual amounts below the threshold that would trigger intensive scrutiny. But I had contacts at 3 of those banks from my consulting days. I made careful phone calls, casual conversations with old colleagues who worked in risk assessment. "Just wondering," I'd say, "have you looked at the collateral documentation on the Henley account recently? I heard there might be some title issues with that downtown property." Within 2 weeks, Marcus received simultaneous demands for documentation from 4 different lenders. The apartment he had been using as collateral suddenly required proof of ownership. Proof he couldn't provide without revealing that his father held the actual deed. The third phase was more creative. David Chen had discovered that Marcus and Sarah were using their company credit cards for personal expenses. Lavish dinners, designer clothes, weekend getaways, all justified as business development and brand building. I arranged for this information to reach the IRS through an anonymous tip to their business fraud hotline. But the crown jewel was the social media exposure. I'd hired a freelance journalist named Rebecca Cross, a young woman who specialized in exposing influencer fraud. I fed her everything: the fake follower purchases, the manipulated metrics, the lifestyle funded by debt rather than income. She pitched the story as an investigative piece on the dark side of social media marketing. The article published on a Friday morning in TechCrunch under the headline "Smoke and Mirrors: How Apex Social Dynamics Built an Empire on Lies." It included screenshots of Sarah's bot followers, analysis of their engagement patterns, and financial records showing the gap between their reported success and actual revenue. The response was immediate and brutal. By noon, Marcus's phone was buzzing with canceled meetings. Sponsors began pulling out of Sarah's influencer deals. The remaining clients started asking uncomfortable questions about their own campaign metrics. I watched it all unfold from my quiet suburban home, monitoring their social media feeds like a scientist observing a controlled experiment. Sarah's Instagram posts went from confident and glossy to increasingly desperate attempts to maintain their crumbling facade. Marcus's LinkedIn became a stream of defensive explanations and hollow promises to address these false allegations. The best part was their confusion. They had no idea who was orchestrating their downfall. They suspected competitors, disgruntled employees, jealous influencers, everyone except the old man they'd dismissed as worthless. 3 weeks into my campaign, Marcus finally came to me. I was in my garden, pruning roses in preparation for winter, when his Tesla pulled into my driveway with the aggressive urgency of someone running from something. He burst through my back gate without knocking, Sarah trailing behind him with mascara-streaked cheeks. "Dad, what the hell is happening?" Marcus demanded, his usual composure completely shattered. "Our business is falling apart. Vertex Corp dropped us. The banks are calling in our loans. There are articles. God, the articles!" I continued pruning, not looking up. "I heard. I'm sorry to hear about your troubles." "Sorry?" Sarah's voice cracked with hysteria. "You're sorry? This is destroying us. We need help." I looked at them, really looked at them. Marcus's designer clothes couldn't hide the dark circles under his eyes or the tremor in his hands. Sarah's perfectly curated appearance had crumbled into genuine desperation. "Help," I repeated, thoughtfully. "That's interesting. I don't recall you ever asking for help before. Usually you just demanded it." "This isn't the time for your guilt trips," Marcus snapped. "We're talking about real money here, real consequences." "Ah, yes, real consequences." I set down my pruning shears. "Tell me, son, when you stood in front of all those people and called my life worthless, did you consider the real consequences of those words?" Marcus's face flushed red. That was for the show, for content. You know how social media works." "Content," I nodded. "My humiliation was content." I had activated my phone's voice recorder app before they arrived, having anticipated this conversation. Every word they spoke was being preserved for potential future use. "Look, Dad, maybe I was a little harsh," Marcus said, his voice taking on the wheedling tone I remembered from his teenage years. "But you have to help us, your family." Family. I tasted the word like wine that had gone sour. "Yes, I suppose I am family. The same way a bank is family when you need a loan." Sarah stepped forward, tears flowing freely now. "Victor, please, we'll lose everything. The apartment, the business, our reputation will be ruined." "Your reputation," I said quietly, "was built on lies. The apartment was never actually yours. And the business, well, let's just say that what goes up on borrowed money and false promises tends to come down eventually." Marcus's desperation was transforming into rage, his face contorting with the same arrogance I'd seen at his birthday party. "You're enjoying this, aren't you, you sick old bastard? You're actually happy with failing?" "Happy?" I considered the question seriously. "No, Marcus, I'm not happy. I'm educational." "Educational?" Sarah shrieked. "What does that mean?" "It means," I said, looking directly into Marcus's eyes, "that you're learning the value of consequences. You spent your entire adult life believing that your actions had no costs because someone else, specifically me, was always there to pay them. Now you're discovering what happens when that safety net disappears." Marcus was recording me now with his phone, probably hoping to capture something he could use against me. I smiled at the irony. "So you're going to let us lose everything?" he demanded. "Your own son?" "My own son," I repeated, "already made it clear that his father's life is worthless. Why would you want help from someone so completely without value?" The argument continued for another 20 minutes, growing increasingly heated as their desperation mounted. Marcus threatened to expose our family business to the media. Sarah sobbed about their future together crumbling. Both of them hurled accusations and insults that revealed the depth of their entitlement and the shallowness of their character. I recorded every word. When they finally left, screaming threats and curses, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Complete, perfect calm. That night, I slept better than I had since the birthday party.
The final collapse took exactly 18 days. It began with the IRS audit, triggered by the anonymous tip about their personal use of business credit cards. The audit revealed not just improper expense categorization, but systematic tax evasion going back 3 years. Penalties and back taxes amounted to $847,000, money they didn't have. The banks moved next. With the IRS liens on their accounts and the revelation that their collateral wasn't properly documented, all 4 lenders simultaneously called in their loans. Marcus and Sarah had 72 hours to produce nearly $400,000 or face immediate foreclosure and asset seizure. The media attention intensified. Rebecca Cross's original exposé had opened the floodgates. Other journalists began investigating similar influencer marketing companies using Apex Social Dynamics as the poster child for industry fraud. Business Insider ran a follow-up piece titled "The $2 Million Fake Life: How Two Millennials Scammed Their Way to Social Media Fame." The article included photos of Marcus and Sarah's lifestyle alongside their actual financial records, painting a devastating picture of deception and delusion. But the cruelest blow came from their own community. The influencer world they'd tried so desperately to inhabit turned on them with vicious efficiency. Former friends posted videos distancing themselves from the scandal. Competitors who'd once envied their apparent success now mocked their downfall publicly. Sarah's Instagram, once boasting 300,000 followers, hemorrhaged users as people shared screenshots of her exposed fake engagement. I watched it all unfold from my living room, tracking the cascade of consequences like a meteorologist following a hurricane's path. Each day brought new developments, new humiliations, new revelations of just how thoroughly they'd deceived everyone, including themselves. The apartment, their crown jewel, their symbol of success, was seized by the bank on a Wednesday morning. I watched the news coverage from my office, noting how the camera lingered on Marcus's face as security officers changed the locks on the door I'd paid for. That evening, the local business journal ran their obituary. Apex Social Dynamics officially closes amid fraud allegations. The article noted that founder Marcus Henley and his partner Sarah Chen were unavailable for comment, and that their business assets were being liquidated to pay creditors. They became, as I'd intended, radioactive. On Friday morning, they came to me one final time. I was expecting them. Their desperate phone calls over the past week had grown increasingly frantic, increasingly humble. The arrogant demands had given way to pleading messages that I'd listened to but never returned. They knocked this time, instead of barging in. When I opened the door, I barely recognized them. Marcus had aged years in weeks. His expensive clothes had been replaced by wrinkled khakis and a polo shirt that had seen better days. His face was gaunt, his hair unwashed, his eyes hollow with the kind of exhaustion that comes from systemic stress. Sarah looked worse. The polished influencer had been replaced by a broken woman whose hand shook as she clutched a tissue box. Her designer wardrobe was gone, replaced by discount store clothing that hung loose on her suddenly thin frame. "Dad," Marcus said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper, "please, we need to talk." I invited them in, noting how they moved through my modest home with the careful deference of people who no longer felt entitled to anything. They sat on my couch, the same couch they'd once mocked as depressingly suburban, and waited for me to speak first. "You look tired," I observed. Marcus nodded, tears starting to form in his eyes. "We lost everything. The apartment, the business, our savings, everything. The IRS has frozen our accounts. We can't even afford a hotel room." "We're staying with my sister," Sarah added, her voice thick with shame. "Sleeping on her couch in Queens. She won't even let us use her internet because she's afraid we'll somehow contaminate her internet presence." I sat in my reading chair and studied their faces with the same careful attention I'd once given to financial statements. The arrogance was gone. The entitlement had evaporated. All that remained was human wreckage. "Why did you come here?" I asked. Marcus looked at his hands. "Because you're all we have left. Because, despite everything, despite what I said at the party, you're still my father." "And what exactly do you expect from your father?" "Help," Sarah whispered. "Some kind of help. Anything. We know we screwed up. We know we were wrong about a lot of things." Wrong about what specifically? The question hung in the air like incense in a cathedral. Marcus took a shuddering breath. I'm wrong about you, about your life, about what really matters. Go on. I spent so many years thinking that your quiet life, your steady job, your ordinary existence, I thought it meant you'd failed somehow, that you'd settled for mediocrity. He looked up at me with eyes that had learned to see clearly for perhaps the first time in their adult life. But you built something real, didn't you? Something solid, something that couldn't be destroyed by bad press or market fluctuations or arrogance. I said nothing. I called your life worthless, he continued, his voice breaking. But it was my life that was worthless, built on lies and debt and other people's money, built on your money, and I was too proud to even acknowledge it. Sarah was crying openly now. We're sorry, Victor. We're so sorry. Not just because we need help, but because we finally understand what we threw away, what we destroyed. I let them sit with their words for a long moment, watching as the full weight of their situation settled over them like a lead blanket. Then I stood up. Marcus, do you remember what you said about my life being worthless? He nodded miserably. Do you remember how you said I was proof that not all heroes wear capes, some just wear disappointment? Another nod. Do you remember how your friends laughed? How your girlfriend filmed it for her social media content? Dad, please, do you remember? I continued, my voice never rising above conversational level. Do you remember how you told me I was the perfect example of mediocrity? Marcus was sobbing now, Sarah clutching his arm as if she could somehow anchor him against the storm of his own past words. I walked to my front door and opened it. Get out. The words were spoken quietly, but they carried the finality of a judge's gavel. Dad, no, please. Get out of my house, both of you. Marcus stumbled to his feet, his face contorted with anguish. This is cruel. This is inhuman. What kind of father destroys his own son? I looked at him with something approaching pity. I didn't destroy you, Marcus. I simply stopped rebuilding you every time you destroyed yourself. The difference is, this time you had to face the consequences of your own choices. So this is it? This is how it ends? This, I said, gesturing toward the open door, is how it ends for us. How it begins for you is entirely up to you. They left without another word. I closed the door, turned off the lights, and walked to my bedroom. For the first time in months, I felt no weight on my chest, no knot in my stomach, no racing thoughts keeping me awake. Justice, I realized, was not about making someone suffer. It was about ensuring that actions had appropriate consequences. For 35 years, I had insulated Marcus from the results of his choices, teaching him that someone else would always pay for his mistakes. Now, he was finally learning to pay his own bills. I slept that night like a man who had completed a difficult but necessary task. Deep, dreamless sleep that restored something I hadn't realized I'd lost: my peace of mind. Spring arrived early that year, as if the world itself was eager to begin again. I woke on a Tuesday morning in March to find crocuses pushing through the last patches of snow in my garden, their purple and white faces turned toward a sun that felt warm for the first time in months. The house was silent, but it no longer felt empty. It felt peaceful. I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad, something I hadn't done since my consulting days. But instead of analyzing someone else's financial problems, I was designing something entirely new, a blueprint for meaning. The Henley Educational Foundation would be established with an initial endowment of $2 million, nearly all of my offshore wealth. The mission statement wrote itself: supporting academically gifted children from working-class families who demonstrate both intellectual promise and genuine character. The irony wasn't lost on me. Marcus had called my life worthless, but that worthless life would now fund dozens of educational opportunities for children whose parents worked with their hands and dreamed with their hearts, just as my father had. I named the foundation's first scholarship program after my mother, Catherine Henley, who had cleaned office buildings at night so she could attend my school plays during the day. The Catherine Henley Scholarship for Academic Excellence would provide full college funding for students who showed not just intelligence, but kindness, integrity, and respect for the sacrifices others made on their behalf. The first meeting with my lawyer, James Morrison, took place on a Thursday afternoon in his downtown office. James had handled my financial planning for 15 years and knew better than to ask probing questions about sudden changes in direction. A charitable foundation, he mused, reviewing my preliminary plans. This is quite a departure, Victor. What brought this on? Perspective, I said simply. I've recently learned the difference between having wealth and having worth. James nodded as if this explanation made perfect sense. The tax implications will be significant. You'll essentially be giving away your entire liquid net worth. That's the point. And your son? Have you discussed this with Marcus? I looked out James's window at the city where Marcus was presumably still living on his girlfriend's sister's couch, trying to rebuild his shattered life from the ground up. Marcus and I are no longer discussing financial matters. This foundation will be my legacy. He'll need to build his own. The paperwork took 3 weeks to complete. During that time, I found myself experiencing something I hadn't felt in years: excitement about the future. Each document I signed, each detail I refined, each meeting with potential board members filled me with a sense of purpose that had been missing from my carefully structured, quietly desperate existence. Elena Rodriguez agreed to serve as the foundation's investment advisor, her eyes lighting up when I explained the mission. Victor, this is brilliant. There are so many kids out there who have the ability but not the access. This could change hundreds of lives. That's the idea. And what about you? What will you do once this is established? I'd been thinking about that question for weeks. What does a 63-year-old man do when he's spent his entire life serving other people's dreams and suddenly finds himself free to pursue his own? I'm going to travel, I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. I'm going to see the places I read about in books but never visited because I was always saving money for someone else's future. The foundation's launch event was held in early May at the downtown library, a deliberate choice that emphasized substance over style. Unlike Marcus's glamorous parties, this gathering was attended by educators, community leaders, and the families of prospective scholarship recipients. I gave a short speech, standing behind a podium in a room filled with people who understood the value of hard work and quiet sacrifice. Education, I told them, is the only inheritance that can't be squandered, stolen, or lost to market fluctuations. It's the gift that keeps giving, not just to the recipient, but to everyone whose lives they touch. In the audience, I saw faces that reminded me of my younger self. Parents who worked multiple jobs, who calculated every expense, who dreamed of better opportunities for their children. Their applause was genuine, grateful, and completely different from the hollow social media validation that had meant so much to Marcus and Sarah. After the event, I was approached by Maria Santos, the mother of our first scholarship recipient. Her son Diego had been accepted to MIT but couldn't afford to attend, despite his perfect grades and 2 part-time jobs. Mr. Henley, you don't know what this means. Diego has been working since he was 14 to help support our family. He never complained, never asked for anything for himself. Now he can have his dream. I thought about Marcus, who had been given every opportunity but had never learned to value them. Then I looked at Maria's work-worn hands and saw my mother's hands, my father's hands, my own hands from decades of honest labor. Diego earned this, I told her. I'm just honored to be able to help. The foundation's first year exceeded all my expectations. We funded 12 full scholarships and provided supplemental support to 30 more students. Every one of them wrote thank you letters. Real letters, handwritten on paper, not social media posts or perfunctory emails. They understood the weight of the gift they'd received. One letter from a young woman named Ashley Chen, who was studying to become a nurse, particularly moved me. Mr. Henley, my parents work in a restaurant kitchen. They've never been to college, but they've worked 16-hour days for 20 years so I could focus on school. Your scholarship means they can finally rest a little easier knowing their sacrifice wasn't in vain. I promise to honor both their dreams and yours. I kept that letter in my desk drawer and read it whenever I needed reminding that some gifts are given with genuine gratitude. As the foundation established itself, I began making plans for the future I'd never allowed myself to imagine. I researched European rail passes, studied Italian language apps, and booked a ticket for a 3-month journey through the places I'd always promised myself I'd see someday. The night before my departure, I had one final task. I drove to the cemetery where my parents were buried, carrying 2 items, the foundation's annual report and a bottle of my father's favorite whiskey. I sat between their headstones as the sun set over the town where I'd been born, where I'd learned about work and sacrifice and the quiet dignity of a life lived in service to others. I learned something this year. You taught me that a life has value not because of what it accumulates, but because of what it gives. I forgot that lesson for a while, but I remember it now. I poured whiskey onto their graves and left the annual report weighted down with a stone between them. The foundation will help kids whose parents are like you. Kids who understand that everything worth having costs something, and that the people who pay those costs deserve respect, not ridicule. I stood up, brushing cemetery dirt from my pants, and walked back to my car without looking back. The next morning, I took a taxi to the airport, leaving my house in the care of a property management company and my responsibilities in the capable hands of the foundation's board. My luggage consisted of 2 suitcases and a sense of freedom I hadn't experienced since my 20s. At 63, I was finally beginning the life I'd put on hold to serve other people's ambitions. The plane to Rome lifted off at sunset, and I watched my hometown disappear beneath the clouds. Somewhere below, Marcus was presumably still trying to rebuild his shattered life, perhaps finally learning the lessons I'd spent decades trying to teach through example rather than consequence. I opened my journal, a leather-bound notebook I'd bought specifically for this journey, and wrote my first entry. Day 1, Rome, Italy, age 63. For the first time in my adult life, I am traveling for my own pleasure, spending my own money on my own dreams. The Catherine Henley Foundation will ensure that my life's work continues in my absence, helping young people who understand the difference between earning something and expecting it. I have learned that revenge is not about destroying your enemies. It's about freeing yourself from the need to serve their expectations. Marcus called my life worthless, not understanding that worth is not measured in social media followers or luxury possessions, but in the lives you touch and the legacies you leave. Outside my airplane window, the sky was painted in shades of gold and crimson, promising new horizons and possibilities I'd never allowed myself to imagine. I was 63 years old, carrying $2 million less in assets, but infinitely more in peace of mind. The foundation would carry on the work of nurturing deserving young minds. Marcus would have to build his own life without my safety net. And I, for perhaps the first time since my father died, was finally free to discover who Victor Henley might become when he stopped being everyone's solution and started being his own adventure. The plane banked toward Rome, and I smiled at the stranger reflected in my window, a man who had learned that sometimes you have to destroy the life that others expect you to live before you can begin the one you were meant to live.